Question. Do you see CleanSpark software solutions ever making its way to residential households, enabling them to become revenue generating?
Absolutely. So there's a term called a prosumer, a producer and a consumer of energy. And a prosumer is a term talked about in the next advancement. So we talk about demand response. So that's the ability for the grid to buy and sell stored energy from an end user. The next level of that is what we is called transactive energy. And we believe that transactive energy will become policy in the very near future. And what that does is that actually allows for customers of a utility that have generation and storage to buy and sell energy as conditions dictate from their neighbor, both commercially or residentially. We also have specific experience. We did a microgrid 2 years ago on a luxury residence outside of San Diego, California. The property, it's a 5 acre estate, and the property was beyond the edge of the San Diego gas and electric grid. And just to stub in power, SDG&E wanted, I'm spitballing here, somewhere in the neighborhood of $120,000 just to bring the power lines to that property. That customer came to CleanSpark and said, could you create for me a microgrid integrating solar plus storage and a backup gen set in the event of an emergency that could power my entire facility? So the answer is yes. We utilized our modeling tool and now use our software to manage that. And so there is a number of examples, but this specific example is a fully grid disconnected 5,000 plus square foot estate on the edge of San Diego that will never have a utility bill because they aren't even connected to the utility grid. So we have the opportunity to certainly create that. The vast majority of the people on this call today probably have solar panels on their roof. The thing that most people don't understand is that if the grid power goes down and you have solar panels, your power still goes off. Adding storage and adding controls gives you the ability to keep the lights on even when the grid is off, to leverage the value of that solar and to potentially participate as utility policies evolve in those transactions where you could theoretically zero out your power bill or even create revenue, like I say, as policy allows.
Your next question. Do you feel that you will get more revenue from retrofit projects or new builds?
We identify that there has been a massive success in rooftop solar. So we don't see it as a retrofit per se. What we see it as is adding storage and controls to an existing generation. If I may just very quickly could add to that, maybe give a little clarity. We're currently working on a project in Northern California for an industrial client that added some, I think 3 megawatts of wind, and then also added solar to their facility because east of the Bay Area, you can set your watch from 4 a.m. until noon based on the winds. And then they also added solar to power this facility. The utilities then modify the tariffs, the time of use charges, and devalue those legacy assets that customer has deployed. A customer then reaches out to an environmentally friendly battery company that we've deployed their resources at Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton and said, hey, we need to add storage so we can save the value for all this energy we're creating. Well, the battery company said, that's great, but you have 2 meters, you're on 2 separate utilities, and you have multiple different types of renewable energy. We'd be happy to sell you a battery, but we don't really know how to size that. So they bring CleanSpark in to model that, to identify where that storage is located, and then to utilize our platform to say when to use that stored energy, when to create more, when to charge, and when to discharge. So as opposed to a retrofit, what it really is a modification to leverage and enhance the value of those legacy assets. It's a terrific profit center for us because it doesn't require the ground up construction and engineering of a whole new solar solution. Opposite that, because of the grid instability and all of the vulnerabilities that we've seen on both coasts of this country in the last week, people are recognizing and identifying that the macro grid, the distribution model has failed. And that's why CleanSpark really sees itself as a disruptor in the space, because as residential, industrial, commercial, military, and now campus type environments are looking to create isolated power grids from which they can rely on energy certainty, that development opportunity is a ground up approach, and there are energy developers actively tackling that industry, lacking the knowledge to correctly model and then subsequently control that. The beauty is we provide that solution, and once we've modeled and assisted in the design, it's locked in our software subscription model for a long term into the future.
Your next question. What are the milestones for reaching profitability?
So we expect to be cash flow positive at early next year, if not by the completion of this year. We already have the contracted backlog, the pipeline that exists. Our restrictions for profitability are really the ability to deploy these projects rapidly. We've found that the pandemic has increased the demand for distributed energy and microgrid solutions, and we've had no negative experience with a couple of unique exceptions. Our manufacturing facility in Los Angeles had an incident of coronavirus, and so we had a 2-week shutdown. It didn't hurt us terribly, but part of the product that's manufactured there then gets shipped to the microgrid that we recently announced in Costa Rica, and the borders are closed. So configuration and then deploying the microgrid itself, as well as the Tesla battery energy storage system that we deployed on site that's controlled by the Impulse software, was something that was required to be done remote. So we believe that while we're seeing rapid growth, those minor delays and restrictions are preventing us from even scaling faster, but we anticipate that that's going to be the case in the very near future.
And we're coming up on your second to last question. Have you received any interest from emerging countries for your technology?
Yeah, yes, definitely. So Costa Rica is one we talked about. We also are doing some developments in Mexico, and there are a number of other developing companies that are, countries that the companies located there are looking for grid stability. Costa Rica is a great example because it's a developed country and it's bordered by developing countries. And the power supply into Costa Rica goes through Honduras, as an example. It's an 1,100 kilometer long single supply line. And when there's a disruption in Honduras, it affects the people of Costa Rica. And there are a number of US based Fortune 500 companies that do business in Costa Rica, Caterpillar and Boston Scientific, and I could name dozens of them. And when there's a disruption in those countries, it dramatically impacts their ability to operate. So what we found is that industrial and commercial clients that are located in countries outside of the US are really in need of that predictable, stable supply of energy. And as a result, we're seeing rapid pull through to our software solutions and our modeling approach, as opposed to having to push it through a sales pipeline. Based on our historical demand and the participation with other companies, we're now fulfilling orders that are actually inbound as opposed to outbound. So we see the opportunity to deploy in foreign countries to continue to grow in the near future. Sorry, my Siri just talked to me.
That's okay. I think Siri wanted to answer the question for you as well. And so your last question, just before we close out here, Matt, I think you mentioned revenue sharing in the presentation. So a viewer wants to know what the revenue sharing would look like, i.e. what percentage of the revenue would be shared?
Terrific question. So it's going to be based on size. As I mentioned, the size of the installation could result in demand response revenues ranging from tens of thousands to millions of dollars per year. So our revenue participation is going to be based on the size of that deployment. Obviously, the larger, the more complex the controls and operation, the greater the opportunity for revenue participation, as opposed to a small facility that's looking for a buy not build approach to leverage the value of their existing storage to participate in those demand response programs. If it's not a super complex approach, it would be lower as a percentage, but it depends largely on that installation. I want to clarify that the revenue sharing is just a unique niche of what that grid fabric acquisition looks like for CleanSpark. The software solution is there's an initial fee, but then it's a SaaS based model, so it provides long-term energy for continual participation in demand response. And the revenue share really comes into play when the grid fabric solution and those protocols are integrated into mPulse. So it can be one way or the other, but either way, it results in long-term software revenues for our company.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our live Q&A. If your question hadn't been submitted and you wish to submit a question following this presentation, you can feel free to do so by contacting, of course, your appropriate account manager here at Renmark. And before we close out, I'm going to hand the floor back over to Matt for final remarks.
Liz, thank you so much for hosting and for making this such a seamless process. I missed the opportunity to be face to face with the people that have entrusted us with their investment capital, but this is the next best thing in light of the current economic conditions. So I appreciate everyone's participation and the thoughtful questions. And I just want to encourage you, please take the information there on the screen. If there's something I can answer for you or provide additional clarity, I'm always available. I always respond. If you send me an email, it's never going to go unanswered, and I try and get to all the calls as quickly as I can. And I'm happy to answer the questions and provide any additional background information on the industry or any of the associated technologies that are now part of the CleanSpark umbrella. I appreciate the participation, and I look forward to the next opportunity.
Thank you, Matt. And with